Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by Bryan Smith. Bryan, how we doing? We're recording this literally 37 minutes after the trade deadline technically wrapped up. How we feeling, man?
We're still in that window of just raw emotion. So, I'm processing. I'm processing inaction, which is different than processing like an actual trade. And what I thought we'd be doing is like scrambling to even say something coherent about a couple people. Instead, I think we're scrambling to not let the full emotions come out.
Yeah, you're right. We have a tight window to record this episode today. We wanted to record after the trade deadline so we could talk about the trades from the prospect perspective, the prospects going away, the prospects coming in, because there's both of those kind of qualities of players for this year's trade deadline. And we had this small window, right, where we're recording this. We're on at 5:37 p.m. on right after the trade deadline, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. A lot of times those trades trickle in after the deadline. The news of them happens like half an hour after the deadline closes. But on the bright side, we have had a chance to dig into some of these players the Cubs did acquire today and yesterday. So
Yeah.
let's, I guess, get right into it. I guess, before we do that, we're going to end this episode. The last 10 minutes or so will be an interview that I conducted with Frankie Scalzo. I was over in Des Moines this past weekend for the first time. I was in Des Moines for the first time. Second time I was in Des Moines, first time at Principal Park. So I was able to chat with a few of the players, see Alex Cohen and all the good folks over with the Iowa Cubs. And part of that was an interview with Frankie Scalzo, which will be on the end of this episode. Also, I'm planning on taking the video, and that will also be posted on the Northside Bound YouTube channel, so you can check out the video form as well. It's me and Frankie just chilling in the bullpen. I felt like a real athlete, so that was good.
Can I ask you if you found that during your time visiting the iCubs, is it true that in Des Moines only the S's are silent?
The city was buzzing. The S's were silent. I can confirm both of those. Confirm
Nice.
both of those facts. Yes, it
Good
was
to
great.
hear. Good to hear.
All right, man. Let's go ahead and let's get into it. Let's get into the trades that happened because we're not going to spend a whole lot of time doing this. You want to go chronologically with these trades?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I think it makes sense to start with one for sure.
Okay. Let's start with the trade. You want to start with the Nate Pearson trade? Is that where you're starting off with?
Oh, yeah. I
No.
mean, it's up to you. I guess we should just start with the third baseman swap, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let's start with the third baseman spot. That's a good call. Let's talk about the trade with the Tampa Bay Rays that came down. That was on Sunday. That was on Sunday afternoon. That trade came down. The Cubs acquired Esan Paredes from the Tampa Bay Rays for Christopher Morel and Hunter Bigge and Tai Johnson. So we can dig in a little bit with the Esan Paredes and Christopher Morel, obviously, but we're going to hit pretty heavily on Hunter Bigge and Tai Johnson and on how they're incorporated into this deal. I'll kick it to you first for some just overall thoughts of the trade.
Yeah, I mean, especially as somebody who follows the Cubs minor leagues, such a crazy little trade. I mean, reacquiring Paredes, who when he was traded, I remember that deal coming down and being like, I know there's one guy popping in the system right now. I kind of hope he's not the guy that goes. Like, it made sense to get Justin Wilson and Alex Avila when they did, but I was like, man, I hope they don't throw in this guy that's popping. And sure enough, like the Tigers saw that Isak was sort of jumping to another level and then watching him succeed. And then like on the other side, I mean, you and I have been watching Christopher Morel since he was in Eugene. And we watched that dude go from, what he's still listed at is 140 pounds. We started watching him when he was actually 140 pounds. And so that means that we've been following him for about, I don't know, 70, 80 pounds and a good 8 seasons. And, just one of like the coolest guys to root for. A guy that you saw like even back when he was in the minors, somebody who just loves playing baseball, who clearly loved being a Cub so much. And so there's like, man, there's the baseball side of this trade, and then there's the emotional, like, these are guys that like we have watched for a long time, and I don't know, it's a lot to process, isn't it?
Yeah, acquiring Isak Paredes is interesting. I mean, it's fun from the perspective of like he was a former Cubs prospect, all that good stuff. For me, it's a little bit full circle because I believe I could be wrong on this, but I believe that my first ever podcast spot, first time ever going on a podcast, was to talk about that trade. And I
Oh,
remember
wow.
trade to the Tigers. And I remember talking about Esan Paredes. And I remember bringing it, like, I was brought on the show as a Cubs fan and also who also knew a little bit about the prospects. And I remember like talking about how I was really upset that Esan Paredes was like the other piece in that deal besides Jamer Candelario. And I remember the host being like, who the hell is this guy talking about Esan Paredes? And it is kind of full circle where now I'm sitting here on a show hosted by myself where it's like now I'm talking about Esan Paredes being the major league, like the starting major league player, the big piece acquired at this trade deadline by the Cubs. So it's like, I don't know, man. This is kind of full circle for me as well. But yeah, the exchange of Esan Paredes and Christopher Morel is just intriguing, and I don't want to go into too much detail, but it's interesting in the fact that like they are opposites in a lot of different ways, right? Where Morel is the guy that hits the ball hard, really good expected stats, really bad actual stats, and Esan Paredes is the opposite, where he doesn't hit the ball hard, bad expected stats, but good actual stats. I was actually on with Alex Cohen on the Iowa Cubs call on Sunday, like literally like half an hour after this trade dropped. We found out about the trade. I came on the air, and Alex and I probably sounded a little silly on the air because we were like, we couldn't believe what had just happened.
Yeah.
But it's a crazy trade. You're not acquiring that superstar player, but like for a guy that is beloved in Christopher Morel, a guy who's a former Cubs prospect in Esan Paredes, and then you throw in Hunter Bigge, who we just got a taste of, and then Tai Johnson, who I know that we're both pretty high on.
Yeah.
It's a lot of moving parts for this trade.
Yeah, and I mean, you guys are listening because you're Cubs minor league fans, and like being a Cubs minor league fan means that like me, Greg, me and the two Gregs of this podcast were texting after this trade. And in like the most true form of this podcast, we all just wanted to talk about the pitchers. Like the third baseman swap is one thing. We can understand why they did that. It hurts in some ways, it's cool in some ways, but it's like, all right, we immediately started digging in like, man, it really hurts to give up Biggie, and holy cow, Tai Johnson was just popping for me. And so that's very much what it's like in our world. Is it's always like the second and third piece of a trade that really kills. And in this one for me, I mean, just jumping in, like Tai Johnson, you had ranked way higher than me on our midseason list. You had him in the low 20s. I had him in the mid 30s. But I watched his most recent outing in South Bend, and then I had gone back and watched another one, and I was like, oh, I got it wrong. I think he's in like the high teens. I mean, I think the Rays did an awesome job scouting him. I think he's showing like a real live fastball that's approaching like 97, 98, and then showing like a really good slider right now. And he comes with a little sort of funk that I think messes with hitters. I think he has a chance to be pretty darn good. And, I mean, that's the piece that nobody's talking about because all the other guys are kind of known commodities. But just as a guy that had literally started popping for me like 3 days before this trade, it was like, oh my, holy cow.
You gave a big write up of Tai Johnson on the 1060 West Discord channel. I'm pretty sure like 48 hours prior to the trade happening.
Yes.
I know that with the Rays, I think that it's telling that they chose Tai Johnson, right?
Yeah.
The way the Cubs the way the Cubs pitching prospects are set up, and you have Cade Horton, and then you have Jackson Wiggins after that, and then it's a lot of like take your pick, right? And we talked about that on this podcast quite a bit. I have Will Sanders. I think you and I both have Will Sanders higher than the rest, but Tai Johnson's absolutely in the mix. I think when you're talking Tai Johnson, Will Sanders, even Jackson Wiggins a little bit, but the Arian Rodriguez, the Nick Dean, the guy like all that draft class from a year ago, all those guys, like there's a lot of like just that next group where it's like pick your favorites. And I think the Rays decided that their favorite was Tai Johnson from that group. I would assume that the Cubs were not willing to part ways with Jackson Wiggins and Will Sanders and Cade Horton, obviously, as a part of this trade. So it's like, all right, here you go, Tampa Bay Rays. Choose your guy from everybody else in the system. And it's pretty telling that the Rays chose Tai Johnson.
Yeah, and I think they chose Hunter Biggie too. And Biggie is a guy that worked his butt off in the winter, came to camp looking better than he ever has, and he's a guy that you can just see why he pops on like the Rays metrics, their sort of R&D department, because especially they're seeing if that fastball can be 100 with a 20 induce vertical break, then he's going to be a really special player because the cutter is really good. And I mean, I think he probably goes right into their bullpen. I bet he's pretty effective even next season. So yeah, good gets by them. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that like I do believe the Cubs got the best player in this deal. And like it is true that you have to give things to get things. And I can understand parting with Biggie because relievers are so volatile. And, Hunter Biggie last season is not a guy that the Rays would have chose here. They would have chose Zach Lee instead. And, that has flipped in a year. So, like, I don't think it's impossible that Zach Lee is, better than Hunter Biggie next season. This stuff just happens that way. And then Tai Johnson, yeah, I mean, that in these trades, that's always going to happen. A guy that's looked really good in the last couple of weeks is always going to be the guy that goes because that's what the scouts are seeing. And then when you add that to like some good R&D stuff, that's just how it works. And so I think the Rays did really well here, even if baseballtradevalues.com says they didn't. But I'm also excited to start watching a third baseman that has power, contact, plays defense. Like it's going to be a good fit for the Cubs too.
Yeah, I think the losing Hunter Biggie hurt fans a little bit more just because we only got just a small taste of Hunter Biggie at the major league level, right? Like 2 games is what he ended up pitching in Chicago. And so I think that like that hit like that excitement. We had a lot of excitement surrounding Hunter Biggie when he made his debut, a surprising amount of excitement considering that he's a reliever. And to trade him away after just 2 major league outings was kind of like, oh man, like I just got excited for this guy. Now he's no longer a part of the organization. And so I think that was a little like jarring, I guess, for a lot of fans. Yeah. But you're right. Relievers are tricky. There's a very good chance that Hunter Biggie ends up being an all-star reliever for the Tampa Bay Rays. There's also a decent chance that if Hunter Biggie would have stayed in the Cubs organization, he would have been an up and down reliever for a few years between Iowa and Chicago. Both things are very possible. We're just gonna have to wait and see how it is. Alex Cohen brought up a very good thing, a very good comparison, I thought, on the broadcast on Sunday. That it's funny that the Rays just traded away Jason Adam because they acquired Hunter Biggie, and I think Hunter Biggie probably slots into that bullpen. And there's a very good chance we're looking at Hunter Biggie in the same way we're looking at in a few years, in the same way we're looking at Jason Adam now, which is unfortunate from the Cubs' perspective, but exciting from Hunter Biggie's perspective.
I'd also point out, you being just in Des Moines and us talking about guys that have looked really good in the last couple of weeks. I think Daniel Palencia is looking really good. I don't know if you came away from your weekend there thinking that too, but part of me wonders if the Cubs were a little more okay trading Biggie, thinking that maybe Palencia's like looking better as well. In addition to a couple of the other young arms, like the Cubs are sort of flush in that like reliever, like will one hit or won't they hit? Like they have a bunch of those guys. And so like at the end of the day, they were going to have to pick their horses a little bit. And while the Rays were probably pressuring them that it had to be Biggie, I think the Cubs were like, all right, like we like Biggie too, but we also like maybe a guy like Daniel Palencia or Michael Arias or whomever.
I think it's a very safe bet that the Cubs felt more comfortable because Daniel Palencia looks the way he has looked. I think that's a really good point. Anything else on Tai Johnson? I know that you said you had him up toward, because it's funny. I've been looking at the rankings, and it's the same reason why we at Northside Bound updated our prospect rankings right prior to the draft and prior to trade season. We updated our prospect rankings because of my frustrations with what we're seeing right now with the trades, right? Like we're seeing the rankings of Jack Neely and Ben Cowles, who we'll talk about here in a minute. And there's a lot of reference to Hunter Biggie and Tai Johnson. We're like, Hunter Biggie may have been ranked towards the bottom of a top 30 rankings, and Tai Johnson was like he just kept being referred to as a guy ranked outside of the top 30. He's not a top prospect in this organization. And I think it's important that you and I both have Tai Johnson and Hunter Biggie as top 22-ish prospects or so in this organization. And so this was not a nothing. I think that they're both tricky because I think that Tai Johnson might ultimately be a reliever. And so ranking relievers is just as fickle as dealing with relievers at the major league level. Right. But this was not a nothing trade in terms of just throwing in Tai Johnson. I don't think Tai Johnson was a throw-in. I think Tai Johnson was selected for a reason, just like Hunter Biggie was. And this was not just a Esan Paredes for Christopher Morel swap. with a couple other guys thrown in the mix. You know what I mean?
Totally. I mean, there is a chance that the Cubs front office was right about the third baseman swap, and then we feel pain like 6 years from now because of some pitchers.
So we traded away some prospects there in the Esan Paredes trade, and
Yeah.
today the final trade of the deadline for the Cubs, unfortunately, was the Cubs sending away Mark Leiter Jr. to the New York Yankees, and in return getting Jack Neely, who is a relief pitcher, a right-handed relief pitcher, and Ben Cowles, who is an infielder who spent most of this year in Double A, correct? And so I want to transition this to this trade because we've been talking about Hunter Biggie and his value to the Cubs potentially, and him being sniffing the major league level, him being at Triple A, and now the Cubs are acquiring Jack Neely, who is another guy, another right-handed relief pitcher who is in Triple A, basically ready for the major leagues in the same way that Hunter Biggie is. You want to kind of compare and contrast losing Hunter Biggie and gaining Jack Neely in this trade.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison because in terms of sort of major league readiness, it's about the same. Neely's probably about a month behind Biggie in terms of just like having pitched in AAA enough to feel very reliably major league ready, but essentially they're in the same spot. And so I don't think the Cubs are necessarily saying with these trades, like we like Neely better than Biggie. That's not how they work out when these trades are days apart. But I do think the Cubs like lost an arm they really liked and then prioritize getting another arm they like. And Neely's fun. I watched 5 outings of his today and then sort of poured through the pitch data that you can with Baseball Savant with his AAA pitches. And big guy, 6'8", but athletic. I mean, athletic and like has really good feel when you don't usually see that with guys his size. Like he really sort of knows where the ball is going. In all 5 outings, like I can think of like one slider he really missed that just like didn't have feel, kind of goes to the top of the zone, and then like a few fastballs where you're missing by a few inches, and one goes out for a home run because it was just a little bit too towards the middle third and not on the inside corner, or fastballs that he just missed off the plate in key spots on full counts and things like that. But in general, like a guy that's hitting the catcher's mitt, and he's doing it at 95 to 97 miles per hour with a slider that you'll read in some places is plus. I think it's probably, I don't know, closer to a plus slider, but it's one of those gyro sliders that looks like a fastball for a minute, and then all of a sudden the bottom drops out. I think we're going to see him this year. I think he's going to be ready for the majors, and I think he could pitch in the majors right now. I think they'll get him with TC in Iowa, pitching a little bit there, get a couple weeks, get some data, maybe try to tweak a thing or two, and then get him to the majors by September 1st. I think he could be successful.
Jack Neely is Rule 5 eligible this offseason. So even if he does not debut this year in Chicago, which he surely will, he will still very, very, very likely be added to the 40-man roster this offseason to protect him from the Rule 5 draft. Yeah, I know that you dug into Neely's outings. You dug into the video quite a bit more than I did, but I think it's worth pointing out with Jack Neely that he really is just a 2-pitch pitcher, right? With the fastball and slider at this point.
Yep.
Versus Hunter Biggie is a guy that had the fastball touching triple digits. He had the slider, he had the curveball, he had the cutter. There were multiple offerings from Hunter Biggie, so that's different with Jack Neely. What do you see with as far as like the fastball shape goes with Jack Neely compared to Hunter Biggie?
Yeah, so I mean the fastball's slower. Biggie, is averaging up towards like 97, even touching 101. Jack is more, I believe he's averaging in AAA 95 and a half. So it's been like 94 to 97. The ride on the fastball, Biggie also has an advantage, not a huge amount. Neely's like the high 16s. Biggie's been all over the place this year, so it's sort of hard to pin down a number with him, but probably more like about 18, so a little less ride on the fastball. But I'd point out again, like way fewer misses than Biggie has. I mean, I think he's pretty reliably going to be a guy that doesn't hit 10% walk rates. And I don't know that we can say that about Biggie. And so I think that's the exciting thing. And then the slider is really good. I mean, it doesn't register much horizontal break. You might get like an inch or two, think it's like 3 feet a drop, which isn't much in terms of like induced vertical break, but you just see hitters all the time, like the pitching ninja like drop to one knee thing. Like he does that to hitters a lot, and so I think we'll see that. I think he's probably a middle reliever in the bigs, but I also think you could, if he adds 2 miles an hour on his fastball, if he adds a splitter, like things like that could happen, and then all of a sudden your ceiling grows. So I'm excited to see what happens with him.
It's worth pointing out that since he was drafted, since Jack Neely was drafted, he has sported one of the best strikeout rates in all of minor league baseball and one of the best strikeout to walk ratios in all of minor league baseball. And he was walking a few more guys in previous years. He's toned that down quite a bit more towards the end of last year and into this year. So that's the strikeout and walk numbers are terrific. And in a lot of ways, that's something that the Cubs have targeted in past years as far as acquiring prospects from pitchers. That's something you're looking at anyways, right? The strikeout to walk ratio. But I'm thinking back to Ben Brown. That was like the main talking point with Ben Brown was his strikeout to walk ratio. That was one of the main talking points with Caleb Killian when he was acquired a few years back, was that strikeout to walk ratio. So that's been something that the Cubs have clearly targeted in prospect pitching in trades.
Yeah.
All right. We also got in that trade for Mark Leiter Jr., the Cubs also acquired Ben Cowles, who is an infielder. He's played all over the infield this year in the minor leagues. He's played predominantly shortstop. I think I saw I don't have the numbers pulled up, about 60 games or so at shortstop, about 30 games at second base, and 10 to 15 games at second base, I think is the breakdown. Don't quote me on that exactly, but he's been playing all over the infield. What are your initial takeaways of Ben Cowles?
Yeah, I mean, a guy that has improved this season for sure. I mean, he's cut down the strikeout rate. I think he popped in the Arizona Fall League last year. I want to say that he hit 4 homers there, which had his slugging percentage up in like the 500 range, mid 500s, maybe 550 maybe. But he struck out a good amount in the Arizona Fall League and then came to AA this year and has kept that real low. I heard reports that I think Baseball America said in their write-up that his bat speed is up this year, which I think is probably, like, to me, the most exciting note that I read on him. That sort of speaks to, like, we're not just seeing a little blip of this strikeout rate. Like, there's actual sort of like science and reasoning behind why it's there. And he has some like natural pop. He has a bit of loft in his swing. It looks like he turns on balls and pulls them pretty well. And then his swing decisions apparently are really good. Not a guy that chases a bunch when you look at those sort of advanced numbers we've heard. So, yeah, a really good season. I think you wonder a little bit about the upside, and I think that's probably what we'll talk about next. But yeah, it's they're getting a guy who's like very productive. And when you think about the upper minors, like the Cubs have had to sign 2 independent league infielders this year in AAA. I think they're getting a little younger and more athletic at that position by doing this trade.
I think it's probably pretty likely we see Ben Cowles up in AAA to start off his Cubs career up in Iowa, considering that the lack of middle infielders and lack of infielders in general in Iowa, especially because of all those injuries they've had between Luis Vasquez and BJ Murray and Matt Mervis. And I mean, the whole infield has been injured basically in Iowa. So I think we see Ben Cowles make his way up to AAA. Yeah, he is pretty familiar with the Cubs organization, with some of the players in the Cubs organization. He played with James Triantos and Kevin Alcantara in the Arizona Fall League last year. He was teammates with Matt Shaw at the University of Maryland, which is they overlapped by 1 season. I think it was Cowles' junior year, and it was Matt Shaw's freshman year at the University of Maryland. So there's a little overlap there, and he might be playing up the middle with Matt Shaw, whether it's in AA Tennessee or in AAA Iowa this year, which is super exciting. I think that the value you talked about, kind of like projecting Ben Cowles in the future, because he's an older prospect. He's a prospect that's up, not older, but up in the upper levels of the minors. And so we kind of have a better idea of projecting kind of where he ends up being as a part of this Cubs organization. And we were texting earlier, and I think that I see a lot of, not necessarily going about it in the same way, but in his body type and where his future value might lie is a guy like Zach Short, who Cubs fans are very familiar with, right? Like, I think body type is almost a 1-for-1 match. I don't have his height and weight pulled up, but like in looking at them on the baseball field, Zach Short and Ben Cowles remind me a lot of each other. Also playing 3 infield positions, second, short, and third. That reminds me of Zach Short. Now at the plate, they're different. Like they go about it in different ways. But I think if you're expecting some sort of like, if you're placing expectations on value and output from Ben Cowles, I think that Zach Short is maybe a good place to go to as kind of major league depth, as a major league bench guy, kind of that realm of possibilities.
The right-handed infielder that has succeeded in Double A is like a thing the Cubs have had a bunch in the last 10 years, whether it's like David Bodie, whether it's Trent Jambroni, Zach Short, Levi Jordan. Like this is a position the Cubs are pretty familiar with. What's interesting to me is he's also Rule 5 eligible this offseason, and I don't think there's a world where it would make sense to have two minor league infielders that are both right-handed hitters be on the 40-man roster. So I think the Cubs are going to have to make a decision on the 40-man. Is it Luis Vasquez or Ben Cowles? And I think that's an interesting one, because what I would say to that is I think Luis Vasquez is the better prospect of the two, because I think he has true shortstop upside. But in terms of who I think would help a major league organization on their 40-man roster more, especially one that has Dansby Swanson, I think Ben Cowles might be a better fit than Vasquez. And so it's going to be really interesting how it plays out with those two specifically, because I think like they're just naturally going to get pitted against each other as the Cubs do that sort of internal, like 40-man calculation.
It's worth pointing out that the Cubs were probably more willing to take on guys like Jack Neely and Ben Cowles that are Rule 5 eligible this offseason, because their Rule 5 draft mix, the guys who they would potentially have to add to the 40-man roster this offseason is probably the lightest mix of guys that we've seen over the past, 5-6 years now. It's been a while since it's been this light in terms of who they need to add. They'll need to add Owen Casey. They'll need to add probably Christian Franklin. And then there's maybe a few other guys that are in the mix to be added, but like no other guys that are close to locks.
Right.
So Ben Cowles he kind of enters that conversation with BJ Murray is eligible. There's a few relievers that are eligible this offseason, but he enters that mix, enters that conversation. The Cubs have an interesting case because they have a lot of middle infielders, a lot of infielders between Miles Mastrobuoni, and they have Nick Madrigal and guys that are going to be non-tendered, guys that are going to be off the 40-man roster. And does Ben Cowles kind of maybe take one of their spots? You mentioned Luis Vasquez, but I think he belongs in that mix, in that conversation of all those players. And that's a valuable player to have in your organization, no matter which route they end up going.
Yeah, I think if there's a question about this trade for me, it's whether they should have pursued more upside with the second piece after Neely. I think Cowles, I don't necessarily look at video early on and see an everyday player. I think, maybe there's one of those situations where an injury happens, he feels it, does really good and keeps it and like wins the job. Like I'm not going to say his ceiling is lower than that. Like I absolutely see that as a possibility for him, but I think the most likely outcome is a bench outcome for him. And then I wonder, like, should you have been, grabbing a complex league guy that one of your scouts really like that's tooled up? That'd be the second guessing that I might do on this trade. But obviously the Cubs are really comfortable with the gains that Cowles have made this year. And if you think that those are really sustainable as he moves up the ladder, then like he's a much surer bet than one of those like lottery tickets.
If Jed Hoyer would have acquired a 19-year-old complex guy, Cubs fans would have never let him hear the end of it.
That's true.
I think from his perspective, in terms of a PR perspective, I think acquiring Ben Cowles was the right move.
Sure. Yeah.
I put my thoughts over on the Discord channel as far as the general range of where I would have these guys ranked. You want me to start off, or do you have any thoughts on that?
You go ahead, and then I'll sort of respond where I'm thinking.
Yeah. So I obviously have Jack Neely ranked above Ben Cowles on my current prospect rankings. And I said on the Discord channel, I'll say it here too, that I reserve the right to change this very soon as I see more video and as I see them in action a little bit more. Like I said, I've only seen these guys for a few hours at this point, but Jack Neely probably falls in the same general range as where we saw Hunter Bigge and see Michael Arias and Porter Hodge, and then down to Frankie Scalzo, right? I probably, at this point, if we're thinking about prospect relievers, rank him right around, like probably closer to Frankie Scalzo than where I previously had Hunter Bigge, right? So we're thinking the 20-ish range in the organization, give or take a few slots, either way for Jack Neely. And then for Ben,
I do the same too.
yeah, right around 20-ish or so. And then as far as Ben Cowles goes, I don't know. I need to see more of him. 30 or so, give or take 5 to 10 slots. That's a wide range, I know. But that range of the organization in terms of prospect depth and prospect rankings is super tricky anyways. And so like I think the difference between 25 and 35 is not much in this organization at all. And so I could see Ben Cowles right now falling in any of that range between 25 and 35-ish.
Yeah, we talked in the draft show about how flush the Cubs are with like really fun, interesting infielders and like complex ball and low A. And, I think you just have to sort of pick your guys among that group and slot Cowles in with there. Like, okay, maybe I don't think he has enough upside to rank him ahead of Angel Cepeda, but I think he has more upside than Tai Johnson. So I'm going to put him somewhere in the middle there. I think like my early guess would be I'd have him like 35.
If you can confidently rank Ben Cowles higher or lower than Ty Southerson or Ariandes Ramon or any of those guys, then you can say all the power to you. You're the next guest on this show because it's just impossible. It's impossible. It's an impossible task,
But let me ask you this, and it'll transition us to our last trade here. Do you feel like Cowles is definitively a better prospect than Josh Rivera?
Not definitively, no. No, okay. I don't think he's definitively better. But actually, I mean, if we're talking about rankings, that's about where I had Josh Rivera ranked was 30 to 40, maybe 45, as low as 40, like 45 on the very low end with Josh Rivera. He's obviously had a rough year. We can transition into that and keep talking about this. But the Cubs earlier in the week traded for Nate Pearson, who we've already seen appear and get ejected from a major league game in Chicago, from the Toronto Blue Jays for Josh Rivera, who was a shortstop or infielder playing for the Tennessee Smokies, and Yohendrick Pinango, who is a longtime Cubs prospect who was at the time playing in AA Tennessee. We'll hit on Yohendrick Pinango for sure. But yeah, as far as Rivera goes, man, I think that on the low end, I'd rank him right around 45 or so. But he just had a really rough season. I think that the assignment for him was a tough one, being assigned to AA. I think that was just – it seemed super aggressive when people were floating it out there in the offseason. When it actually happened, it felt super aggressive still. And then after seeing how he performed, it was aggressive all the way around. And I wish we would have seen him in high A South Bend instead. And I'm curious on how he would have performed there. I know he would have been too old for the level technically in high A South Bend, but like the numbers just weren't there. I was a guy that wasn't super, super high on the Josh Rivera draft pick when it happened back in 2023. I was one of the lower people on that. And so, like, I probably rank Ben Cowles above Josh Rivera. But, like, they're not too far off from each other. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the power tool is probably somewhat similar, like just in raw power. Obviously, Cowles is getting to it a lot easier right now, but I think Rivera has that in him. Rivera probably a better defender, more likely to stick at shortstop, more likely to just be a plus defender at multiple positions. But like overwhelming the hit tool, Cowles just has such a better feel at the plate, swinging at much smarter pitches, knowing when to do damage on pitches. Not like it just felt like Rivera was so defensive all year. Like he just never really got off the bus as far as it goes offensively. And Cowles is sort of the opposite. He was pretty good from like day one. I mean, his April was fantastic and kept it going. So, yeah, I think he passed him by. I don't know that. I think I would have fought Yankees fans going into the year that Rivera was the better player, and now I'm like, okay, I'll take Cowles.
Well, it's interesting, right? We can pretty clearly compare and contrast Hunter Bigge and Jack Neely. We can pretty clearly compare and contrast Ben Cowles and Josh Rivera. At the tail end of this, we can kind of look at the whole haul and how we kind of assembled this whole thing. But let's talk Yohendrick Pinango because I think he absolutely warrants some conversation considering the duration that he was in this Cubs farm system. He's been around for a long, long time. It seems like still super young. Kind of broke out a little bit early this year. I think he really, really recouped some trade value this season by performing the way he did in South Bend, even though it was the third time back in South Bend, fourth. Fourth time back in South Bend. We had a whole episode where we talked about that for about 20 minutes. And because of course we did. But no, I think that he clearly recouped some trade value this year. I think that was always probably the plan as far as the Cubs front office goes, and trying to, because he was always kind of behind the other top higher end Cubs outfield prospects in this organization. And so being able to recoup that value was super, super impressive and super important from the Cubs perspective, I'd imagine, in order to get a guy like Nate Pearson.
Yeah, a guy, I believe Pinango's minor league free agent eligible after next season. And so I think the Cubs probably didn't see a world where he was going to factor into the 40-man for them. But you can see why other organizations would have some interest there. I mean, he does have a feel to hit, and he does have like plenty of strength to sort of project some raw power into. And so there's enough sort of tools that get flashed on a week-to-week basis that I can see why somebody would be interested.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who's changed the way he hits over each year, it seems like, right? At first, he was a guy who never hit the ball to the right of the third baseman when he was first coming up. It was oppo down the line every single hit. High contact guy. He started tapping into some power. He posted really good exit velos over the course of his time in South Bend, and he just never really put it all together to make himself a complete hitter at the plate. But I'm curious to see what he does in Toronto. I think that he gets some fresh life. I think that it's a change of scenery will be super important for Yohendrick Pinango. So I'll be keeping an eye on him as he continues his career in Toronto.
If we talk briefly about Nate Pearson, I want to point out our friend Kevin McCaffrey of the dearly missed away games pod had a great tweet about it, where he pointed out, and I had forgotten this, but he said, I've been whining about Nate Pearson for a long time because the Cubs drafted Brendan Little one spot ahead of Nate Pearson. And in that draft, I don't even know when that would have been, 2018, 2017, something in there.
Yeah.
And so Kevin pointed out that Nate has sort of been a guy that he's sort of like thinking about adjacent to the Cubs system for a long time. So it is funny that the Cubs add that arm after passing on him back then. But, you know, a guy that we watched become one of the best pitching prospects in the sport and then get injured and it just hasn't really clicked and worked out. But, you know, Cubs betting on a really talented arm that's having his sort of best recent season in terms of translating his pitches to major league success. His slider especially has been really good. The fastball less so, but hey, he can hit 100 miles per hour. So like Cubs are probably betting they can figure out how to make that work at some point.
Brendan Little still in the Blue Jays organization too?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I think the Cubs basically swapped that one,
right? That's kind of wild. That's a crazy swap. All right, man. I kind of want to. So I mentioned Jack Neely, Hunter Bigge, comparable, right? Josh Rivera, Ben Cowles, comparable. Esan Paredes, Christopher Morel, like Paredes is very clearly an upgrade in terms of like production wise, but you can very clearly compare those two with each other. And so what's left over is the Cubs acquire Nate Pearson. They give up Tai Johnson and Yohendrick Pinango and get a slight upgrade, or not a slight. They get an upgrade in terms of production at third base. I don't know. That's
well, I guess they downgrade from Mark Leiter Jr. to Pearson, basically, right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, downgrade from Mark Leiter Jr. to Nate Pearson, upgrade Morel to Esan Paredes.
And then it's just a lot of shifting.
It's a lot of shifting. So it was an interesting deadline. I wish they would have done more. But any last takes before we kick it to this interview?
You know, if you're a cynic, you'd say they're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And, you know, as somebody who wished they did a little more today, then maybe that's how I would frame it.
All right, man. For those of you guys out there, appreciate you tuning in. We got this interview with Frankie Scalzo Jr. coming up. Super entertaining guy, as always. Second time for him on the podcast through this interview style. Enjoy that. Hope you guys enjoy that interview, and we'll be back in your ears in one short week. Thanks, guys.
Go Cubs.